everybody. Welcome to another webcast that we have here with ChangeNerd. We are so excited. We have Alex Process here today, who is an expert in really creating inclusive workspaces and then also in organizational development. Alex has such an immense background, a really tremendous background in across all industries. So we'll talk about those today, from technology to sort of the startup space and government contracting to ERP implementation. So I'm really excited to have her here today. For all of you who are joining us for the first time or seeing this for the first time, my name is Stephanie Waite. I'm the co-founder of ChangeNerd, and we're here today to really bring you really pragmatic approaches from practitioners in the field and also fellow change nerds. So hi, Alex. Welcome.
Hi, happy to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Today's going to be a really incredible conversation, really around designing inclusive workspaces. You know, it's such a hot topic right now, and we're really excited to have you share how you've done this really across your experience with all the other organizations you've been in. So before we get into all that, though, share with us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about who you are and your experience.
Yeah, so my academic background is actually, I have both a bachelor's and a master's in African American studies. And I think that was a bit formative, you know, for where I go in my career, and has definitely always been knowledge that I've kept with me and leveraged, and especially around critical thinking skills. So I actually, after grad school, happened to be working in retail. Yeah, that's where I got my HR start. That was definitely a crash course in all things HR. And then from there, I actually went to a school, really kind of a generalist position, and then went to a technology company. And that's really where I got my organizational development start, and really got to kind of dive into all the things that I'm passionate about, which really is just encompassed by the employee experience. And then from there, I was asked to join a startup that would also be a government contractor that would have to hire, 100 people in months. And I had to be a true organizational development person and really create all of the programs for everyone. So that was a really incredible experience. And then I'm currently actually part of a change management team at a company that does ERP implementation. So my first foray into external consulting. So I've gotten some really great exposure and experience there, but at the same time, doing quite a bit of work internally with different D&I initiatives and just kind of inclusive behavior initiatives generally.
Yeah, that's huge. Wow. I hope all of you who are watching this today understand why Alex is here. I'm excited to dive into all of your experience and share it with our change nerds and our individuals who are listening to this today. So let's get into it. Are you ready? I mean, let's talk about it. All right. So first question I really want to sort of get into with you is, part of the reason why people tune into these Change Nerd webcasts is really to get these pragmatic approaches. Like how do you do this in an organization? So the topic we're talking about today is really, creating inclusive workspaces. So I kind of want to throw it over to you. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to start in the technology space, because I think it's something that a lot of people are going through right now. How did you really create, or give us an example of a way that you really created an inclusive workspace in the technology company that you're working in?
So that was maybe 7 years ago that I started at that company. And, what was interesting was it was, going through many, many changes all of the time. So everyone was always kind of a bit, experiencing a bit of change saturation. So when you're dealing with that, you want to make sure that you're very measured about the different approaches that you take. The other interesting thing about that company was, they were going through an investor search for quite some time. So, money wasn't growing on trees, that's for sure, right? So, had to be very scrappy. And I think that's where I've been able to thrive, is figuring out how do we get the data without thinking we have the data, right? Where can we find the data, and where can we make moves based upon this data? So what I did there was actually, we knew that we needed some sort of measure of employee engagement. And we didn't have any really leverage to say, we want to survey, you know, and just tell the executives that we need a survey. We knew we needed some quantitative and qualitative analysis to get that done. So what I did was I actually went through every single self-assessment in the company, so about 550 people globally, and identified roadblocks, identified themes, and, you know, provided both a quantitative analysis that had the statistics around how often this was mentioned, but also the qualitative analysis to say, here's the data, here are some recommendations you can consider. And from that, we were able to get an employee engagement survey to be approved. So that was exciting. Unfortunately, we were bought shortly after that, so we couldn't do too much with that. But I think that's just a small example of when you can do a lot with a little. And that next step was kind of getting into those really, you know, inclusive type behaviors, those initiatives that could really make it a better and more engaging environment for everyone. From there, at the startup, you know, well, actually, I'll pause there and say, do you have any questions about that before I move on to any other examples?
Yes, I think we could do a whole like discussion just around that in itself. You know, I just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit in the sense of, I think right now, you know, what you just sort of shared was that, you know, creating inclusive workspaces isn't this like intangible thing. It's not a gray space. It really truly can be measured, or there are key metrics or KPIs that we can attach to it. And it sounds like, you know, for you, it was really important. If we want to prove or create an inclusive work environment, and we want to get to creating or gathering data that can help us create an inclusive work environment, we actually have to role model and showcase those behaviors, which is exactly what you did. You went around to all 550 people and did these interviews to collect information and data to sort of prove that. So I love that format in the sense of you were really practicing what you were preaching. And I think that's something that's very rare nowadays. So yeah, thank you for sharing that piece to this. I know now more than ever, we're actually seeing engagement scores rise as a result of, you know, COVID-19 and this sort of pandemic that's occurring, which is so fascinating. So I know there's a lot of research on that. So creating inclusive workspaces, I'm sure there's a bunch of literature that we can go out there as well to connect to engagement. Thank you for sharing that one. I mean, let's dig even deeper. Let's go to sort of the next you know, industry, if you will. I know we have a lot of change nerds and individuals who'll be listening to this call that, you know, you had mentioned it's the technology space. Let's switch into something else. Give us another example from a different industry that you've been in where you've seen really excellent sort of pragmatic approaches to creating inclusive workspaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I do want to mention with that last example about engagement is, you know, sometimes people can get into their head when they hear inclusive workplace, they automatically go to D&I and think that it's, you know, it's something that, you know, you answer a question on an engagement survey, this is an inclusive workplace. But really it's about building habits, and it's about building trust in the organization. And transparency and strong communication is so key to an inclusive workplace. You've probably heard the term psychologically safe space, right? You can never have an inclusive workplace if you don't have a psychologically safe space where people can feel like they can be their authentic selves, they trust their organization, and that's how they become engaged. So I realized that last example, you know, people may have been looking for, you know, something directly correlated to D&I, but it's all part of the same thing, right? It's all part of just feeling that sense of belonging at the organization. So I just wanted to make that point. So with the next organization I mentioned, so I was at a startup, and what was interesting about it was it wasn't just, you know, any startup. It actually, you know, was a contractor for the government, so highly regulated, and had a very quick setup schedule. As I mentioned earlier, you know, having to hire 100 people in just a few months, and how do we set them up for success, right? What I really loved about the organization is, you know, diversity was embedded into it. We had, you know, a certain percentage we had to use for supplier diversity. And we expanded that into our recruiting efforts. You know, there was a lot of accountability built into that. And so we got this incredibly diverse workforce, which is really exciting. But we hadn't necessarily accounted for how to get that very diverse workforce to work together in a way that is incredibly efficient, productive, innovative, which is, you know, one of the great parts of a diverse company is that innovation piece, right? But if you just recruit for diversity and you don't think about that inclusive aspect, it's still going to fail, right? And your diverse candidates are going to leave, your diverse employees. So one thing that I did while I was there was, you know, once we started to see some of the cracks in that, right? Like started to see, okay, we see some things happening. People aren't working together as well as we'd like. Actually put together a workshop called Leveraging Cognitive Diversity. And it had several components to it. In the first part of it, we talked a bit about cognitive bias. So what gets in the way of working well together? And I also built in some exercises around building connection. So use some questions that have been scientifically proven to build connection. A resource that I pulled quite a bit from that I recommend is called The Respect Effect. If you haven't read the book, like I said, I do recommend it. And then from there, we actually leveraged the DISC assessment to figure out how to work together better. But the focus was not on, you know, this is me, this is how everyone else should treat me. The focus was on how do I adapt to my colleagues? How do I have a better conversation, a team dynamic, you know, with my colleagues? And, you know, DISC isn't the only assessment you could use for that, right? There's a lot of assessments out there that you could really kind of use the same premise. But that was a way that, you know, we were able to have that framework for working better together that was really helpful. And we actually saw in our engagement survey, the next one, we saw innovation scores go up. So the questions around innovation, which we're really excited to see. And obviously, you know, there could be many, many aspects that went into that score, but, you know, this was something that was directly tied to that. So we were excited to see that. The other thing I did at that company was I built into the onboarding solutions a lot of the human element. So, you know, that kind of core of design thinking, really, you know, using empathy, thinking from the standpoint of the end user. And, you know, really tried to make it as much of a human experience as possible. And while, yes, you have to have processes and you should follow processes, you know, I think in that quest to follow processes, especially in a highly regulated industry, that's where people can forget about what it's like to start a new job and, you know, why we need to have that engaging aspect. So I built an intranet portal where, you know, people could, you know, look at information, ask questions, and, you know, we had certain metrics around, you know, 48-hour turnaround for any question, those kind of things. So that, and then, you know, when they came on board, you know, had a really robust program for them and really made sure the managers were bought in. They understood all of the important parts of that. You know, the CEO would have a breakfast, you know, once a month with everyone who was new. And we had a survey, of course, I'm big on the data. We had a survey to go along with that. And we actually found that, I'd have to double check my records, but I believe it was 95% of people who were onboarded felt like they had the tools to be successful going forward. And that was really exciting to see. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why in our first year of existence, we were very highly ranked on Built-in's, you know, top companies to work for in Chicago. So we're really, really proud of the work that we did there to make it inclusive, especially given what little time we had to figure it all out.
I love that. And I think what you even started to go into as well is sort of this next layer of creating a culture of belonging. I mean, you said this earlier, and, you know, you and I have talked about this so many times. You know, it's one thing to create this culture of inclusivity and allow everybody's voice to be heard and being there. And I honor and I respect you and creating connections. And then it's another to be, I don't want to even use the word indoctrinated, but, you know, in any onboarding process, it's about learning the norms and the culture of the organization. And it sounded like you all really took that time, and it's a really sacred time to allow people to feel where they belong, you know, not sort of diminish their uniqueness and say, you can't be that, be this, but bringing you in from a diversity perspective. Now we're included in this discussion and you belong here. Here are the tools that you need, you know, to utilize in certain ways in order to feel that sense of belonging. belonging, which we know from Maslow's hierarchy and all that kind of jazz from a psychological and human element perspective, was just the, you know, the core of all things. So I would imagine that your engagement scores would go up for sure. So yeah, that's what a huge and incredible example. And thank you too, Alex. I think for everybody listening to this, so often we give these like ideas and it's so easy to say, oh yeah, that could work in our organization, or I could take that piece, or that would never work. And we sort of, you know, could put it out to the side, or we sort of categorize it. The one thing that you do really excellently and well, and that is a huge philosophy of mine as well, and also at ChangeNerd, is what are those metrics? What is that data that's going to showcase that this was successful and that we did achieve some sort of goal that we were intending, or even some unintentional goal, right? Mm-hmm. So thank you for also showcasing the metrics of KPIs on the back end, or how you all measured it. I think that that's something that people struggle a lot with. So thank you for that. Excellent. Well, sort of, I guess, as we end and sort of talk through everything, I want to hear, give us another example. There's got to be one more that you have in a different industry. You know, we talked about technology and sort of that cyberspace. You know, we just sort of talked about, you know, contracting in the startup space, especially in the governmental. What else? Give us one more example where you've seen or you've done personally this creation of creating inclusive, you know, workplaces.
Yeah, so I think what's most interesting is my current workplace, because I don't have an internal position, right? So everything I'm doing is true, you know, change management philosophy, just kind of taking what I know and leveraging that for impact, right? And I do want to give a shout out to Brian Hampton's course on ChangeNerd Accelerator, because I've actually found it to be useful quite a bit when I'm looking at organizational change management and, you know, changing from within. So at my current organization, as I mentioned, I'm actually an external consultant, but where, you know, I've been able to make a lot of impact when it comes to the inclusive workplace is on different internal initiatives. So I lead the Inclusion and Belonging Committee, which actually handles all the metrics for the ERGs, for the D&I programs. You know, again, no surprise there, right? That's a space I love. And I also lead the Women's ERG. And so from that, I've actually kind of forayed into different areas. So, you know, when everything, you know, was really in the news with the protests, with, you know, the killing of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and obviously the Central Park incident, you know, like a lot of organizations, they were wondering, you know, what can we do? And, you know, between the leadership of the Black employees, their ERG, and myself and some others involved, you know, we're able to get leadership on board with having conversations. And because of my academic background and org dev background, I co-facilitated those conversations. And that was really powerful. And they were, you know, maybe 25 people. And people walked away really with a lot of knowledge, especially around microaggressions. We have such a positive culture. I think that was where people weren't really understanding where they could have impact. And so to really kind of make people understand impact over intention, we're actually operating from the premise that everyone has positive intent here, that the average person who works at this company truly does want the best for each other. So, you know, at the end of the day though, that still impacts someone. And if it hurts someone's feelings or offends someone, you know, you have to own that and learn from that, right? And, you know, it's not about shaming the person who commits the microaggression. It's about saying, hey, you know, that wasn't okay. You know, let me tell you why, let's fix that. Or, you know, and obviously not to put the onus on the person who's been victimized, but, you know, someone observing it, right? You know, to say, hey, that's not okay. So that was one, you know, one impactful thing that we did. We're really all about embedding those inclusive behaviors. So I've been working with the person leading the D&I initiatives internally to talk about what are ways we can meet people where they're at, right? So, you know, getting on a department meeting, just 5 minutes where we can just talk about some inclusive behaviors of managers, you know, and really just focusing on the habits part of it. And that's kind of how you embed it into the culture. And, you know, really kind of using that same phrasing in everything we're doing, you know, building inclusivity, not being about the punitive aspect of it, but rather kind of building each other up, because that's what fits the culture. And would I have done the exact same thing in my other organizations? Not necessarily, no, because the culture was very different. We probably would have approached it differently. And that's, I think, where, as long as you're coming from a place of understanding the culture, understanding what's going to work there, meeting people where they're at, building those habits, that's where you can have a lot of impact and success, no matter what your position is.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I wanted to like clap for a second, but no, I think what you were just talking about, I think a lot of us, right, especially as individuals who may not even be formal change practitioners, but might be leading work that sort of evokes a change in some way or elicits a change in some way. And whether it be, I like, the delineation, right, between there's sort of a large mass cultural change that occurs, but then there's also this individualistic or individual behavior change that needs to occur. And that often is a really scary thing, especially when you're joining a company, because you're like, no, I want to be seen as the best. I want to be there, right? And to really get deeply embedded with our own mental models about how we grew up or, what experiences we've had or have not had, right? Or what are equally shaping. It sounds like you were able to dive in with this culture and really start to do some sort of personal development, which then leads to obviously, professional and leadership development. Yeah, that's incredible. I have a feeling that you might get a lot of conversations or calls after this saying, hey, what were your metrics? And how did you do that again? And what were those workshops?
I could talk about this stuff all day long.
Yeah.
So please, would be happy to talk with anyone. Do not hesitate to reach out. I mean, I could go on for hours. So, I won't do that to you, but please do feel free to reach out.
Yeah, you bet. Well, we're lucky that we were able to sort of chat with you today for the short period of time. We're very grateful for your participation in the ChangeNerd community, and then all the work that you're doing within all of your organizations really is huge for us, where we're able to, really understand what our people are doing with boots on the ground. I think that's one of the unique things about the ChangeNerd community is we're all doing such incredible transformational work, regardless whatever our title is or whatever our role is, but it's, we're truly deeply focused on the value of inclusivity. So thank you for being here, Alex. Before we close out though, do you have any thoughts, anything that you want to share with people, any last minute sort of advice that you would have as people are building inclusive work places?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I get that it can be very overwhelming. A lot of us are dealing with COVID and dealing with, budget cuts and all of that. But I encourage all of you to, leverage the power that you do have. You can do a lot of great things and make a difference. It was really just a matter of me saying, hey, I have this background, use me, even though I'm on the external side. And, you may think the data's not there, but it is. And there's a lot of ways to get it. So don't be afraid to, use informal, even if it's just a SurveyMonkey survey, right? Use it. That's still data and leverage it to make your, qualitative case.
Yeah, that's huge. Using the data to sort of approach this inclusive workplaces development, I think is huge and so needed right now. So thank you, Alex, for being with us. For all of you all who have tuned in with us for another ChangeNerd webcast, really around creating inclusive workplaces. And I'll add on there using the data, as Alex has sort of shared with us today. If you haven't already, make sure that you jump into the community if you're not a ChangeNerd yet. At community.changenerd.com. Again, it's community.changenerd.com. If you're able to jump in there, if you're already a ChangeNerd, go ahead and comment on this LinkedIn post below, or if you're seeing it in the actual community, which is the full-length video, go ahead and comment on it as well. We look forward to many more ChangeNerd webcasts with you all on really hot and provocative topics. And then also make sure that you go into the community and check out our events that are up and coming. We wish you all the best and everything that you all are doing today. So have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you all very soon.